Hey restorers, welcome to a very special episode of the Restoration Today podcast. As hopefully many of you know, we are doing ongoing coverage on the California wildfires and trying to both get stories out of that area and what's happening, talk to restorers on the ground, and also get some insights from people who have been through maybe similar situations before, who might have some insight into what are the months and honestly probably years ahead going to look like. This is a massive disaster that obviously is going to take many years to come back from, and things probably will never be this the way that they were prior to these fires. So it's gonna be all hands on deck when we go in and can start restoring, and there's going to be homes within many miles that are going to need smoke damage work, and there's just a lot of work to be done. So I am excited, for one, to have Lauren Etherington with us in this podcast. She is CNR's fabulous editor. She has been with the team for I think like 2 years now, and she is amazing and kind of runs all the content behind the scenes. And so I'm excited to have her here with me, kind of co-hosting and helping drive the conversation forward. And we have Mr. Anthony Nelson, who has been with me on multiple podcasts in the past. You've hopefully seen his conversations with the RIA. He's on the RIA board of directors, and he has a lot of Facebook Live videos and stuff like that he does with a lot of people within the restoration industry. And so he's a restorer turned consultant, and he currently lives in Maui and has lived through the Lahaina fires, and knows what it looked like right after those happened, and then kind of as the restoration process has been going. So Anthony, thank you very much for being here. That was a very long-winded intro for me. So Anthony,
A lot to say. There's a lot to say.
Lots to cover.
Yes, a lot to cover. So, Anthony, I'm going to toss it to you first to share a little bit about your background, and then the Lahaina fires, and kind of like what happened from your vantage point, that your experience going through those fires. It's a big question.
That is a big question. So, for those folks who don't know me, 42 years old, started out as a technician in the industry. Had grown multiple restoration businesses, and really enjoy the work because it provides the opportunity for folks to make a difference in the lives of people every day. Like, who doesn't want to be Superman? This is the closest you can come to being Superman and not having to go get a PhD. It's pretty cool. On Lahaina, there's so much there. I think the advice that I would give to individuals who are directly impacted right now is to be patient. The way that our brains work when something traumatic happens is that we want to try and place fault or place blame in somewhere, and our brains are just not wired to accept that sometimes bad things happen. And I know in our particular wildfire event, there was a lot of criticism being leveraged against a lot of different entities and individuals. But if you looked at it with a cool head and you asked the question, were they making the best decisions they could have made at the time with the information they had? Reliably, people were doing everything they could, and progress is just slow. So, try and I've got two young daughters, and one thing that we have tried to instill upon them is, in moments of crisis, find the helpers and help the helpers. Like, if you don't know what to do, find the helpers and figure out a way to help the helpers. Because in these instances, a lot of the times what we're looking to do is just try and take action in some sort of meaningful way, whether that's donating of our money, donating of our time. So find the helpers and go help them. And it'll give you a little antiseptic to the pain you're experiencing.
One of the things looking at these California wildfires and then the Maui wildfires, like, obviously, not just tons of buildings are just burned to the ground, but like communities are entirely destroyed. So obviously, we're not at the end of the California wildfires yet, but like there's going to be a lot of rebuilding to do, not just from the structural standpoint, but with communities. Can you talk about, now that we're like a year and a half or so from the Maui wildfires, what do you see that rebuilding process look like, both structurally, like rebuilding these homes and these businesses that were destroyed, but also the community? What does that feel when you're actually there?
Painful. Um, I know for me, like I'll speak individually, right? And then we can clear my heart and then get into like, hey, here's what you could do, right?
Perfect.
Um, like I know people who lost their life in the fire. I know several families that were directly impacted, and a majority of them had to relocate. Like they're not here anymore. Some of them are trying to find a way to get back here, and to have the stability of your social foundation, like just have a jackhammer taken to it. It's hard. It's just hard. And there's no, like there's almost nothing that makes it okay in your head.
Hmm.
Um, I think in the early days of what was happening with our wildfire event, um, what was still blows my mind was how the community rallied together. And like the civil contractors in our marketplace, like like they're always kind of friendly, but they're always trying to kick each other's butt. They're trying to win this contract and do this thing. And to watch them just throw those barriers down and say, all right, you know what? Doesn't matter. What can we do to make a difference? One guy that I know pretty well, Chemo Clark. He's on Insta, like he's got a great Instagram channel and he's a character and he's fun, but also brutally honest. Lahaina born and raised, lost his house, his base yard burned to the ground. He's a excavation contractor. And I remember talking to him in the early days, and he's, in an excavator, in a dozer, doing whatever he thinks is right. Like, first week, he's just like, nobody's telling him what to do. He's just like, oh, you need this building knocked down? Cool, I'll knock it down. So then that way it's safe for people to come and look and see if there's bodies here. Um, and I remember in those early days just being like, kind of feeling insanely jealous of Chemo because he got to go do the work. And I'm sitting here on the sidelines trying to pump resources in and not be a distraction.
Mhm.
Um, and so know that if you're feeling that, that's normal. I felt it too.
Yeah.
Um, FEMA, for all its flaws, I have way more positive things to say about what FEMA did for our community than negative. Like I said, hindsight's always 2020. You look at things on the back end and you're like, yeah, we could have done that better. But every single individual I interacted with from FEMA was top shelf, like was there for the right reasons. And at no point did I ever get frustrated because I felt like they were being insensitive or didn't know and were disrespectful to the culture of Hawaii or anything like that. So I'd encourage everybody out there to give those folks space. They have a playbook. They're going to execute to the playbook. It's not going to be perfect, but they have more knowledge about these events than we do. And
Mhm.
so lean into that knowledge and intuition and trust them. One of their primary objectives is going to be to go secure anything that is hazardous in
Mhm.
the residence. Think like propane tanks that survived a fire, hazardous materials, those types of things. Like one of the challenges that we had in our wildfire event was, like all the renewable battery backup systems,
Mm.
like lithium batteries are gnarly when they catch on fire and they burn for days and days and days and they're hard to put out and stay out of people's way. Like that's a hard enough challenge. And, those things need to be resolved before, like owners, restorers, any of those types of folks are going to be allowed to come back in. And as painful as it is to sit on the sidelines and be patient, that is literally the best thing you can do. And like I just go back to help the helpers. All right, if you're sitting there and you're like, I can't sit here anymore, go do what you can do.
Do you have, okay, so I want to touch on that a little bit more because I feel like that's kind of the root of this conversation because we're recording this as the fires aren't fully out. I mean, we are not at the point where restoration efforts have really begun yet, and who knows when that will be. So there are obviously a lot of contractors in California that have existing relationships, and they might be able to do a little bit here and there, but the rest of the country is sitting and watching, and restorers are designed to go in and help solve these problems. And so I'm sure that a lot of contractors, a lot of restorers are having the same feelings you had with Lahaina of like, I'm watching this and I want to help, but I don't know how. I want to send in the resources. I want to
Yeah.
do whatever it is. And it's not all about me. I just want to help. So what advice would you give those contractors now? I know you've said be patient. Do you have any other
Yeah.
advice?
Some things that you can do right now, whenever you're trying to coordinate response to a local market that you're not from, finding somebody in the industry to partner with,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's the sharing of resources, whether that's, because if you're in that market, you're going to be flooded with more work than you can ever handle. And
Yeah.
so sitting there and going, okay, look, this is not an opportunity for me to go in and plant my own flag. If I got to fly somebody else's banner to do some good, like let that guard down and go do what's right for the community. Also, making sure that you have checked all the boxes from a regulatory standpoint and a licensing standpoint. I know the state of California just provided an exemption pathway. RAA had posted something about it. I didn't dig into it, but if you're considering responding, that would be the first place I'd go to look. And then the other thing is older, like a lot of the homes are of a vintage and a year built where hazardous building materials are more common. If this was all newer construction, we'd be far less concerned. But the one thing that was an obstacle that we had to overcome was addressing whether or not hazardous building materials in any of the structures that burned had potentially contaminated adjacent structures that did not burn.
Mm.
And so going in and making sure that you are being mindful that there could be lead in the smoke particulate that entered this home. There could be asbestos that entered this home, and making sure that you're like, a lot of the times they come back negative. In my experience, a lot of the times they are coming back negative, but don't, by trying to do the right thing, don't unknowingly put individuals in harm's way, right? Make sure that you have done that testing and done that research so then that way you can send teams in with confidence. And those are things that once you have access, even if you can't mobilize, getting your arms around, okay, we've got 50 leads, we've got 100 leads, what can we do today? Going and saying, okay, these ones are cleared, right? Like there's no lead, there's no asbestos in the particulate. Cool. Then you know that you can just follow the regular protocol for restoring the property with confidence.
Going with that same idea of finding the helpers, and what would I know there's a lot of nonprofits and that you're involved with some nonprofits back with the Maui wildfires and maybe now with the California wildfires. Can you talk, you mentioned Red Lightning is one of them. Can you talk a little bit about them and other maybe people that aren't wanting to respond necessarily, but still want to help, kind of what can they do?
Yeah. So a lot of thoughts on this. Like there's some nonprofits that have a long-standing track record of doing good in communities when disasters are occurring. A lot of them, they have their own specialties and their ways of doing it. Like if you look at like entities like Team Rubicon, right? They're a labor workforce. That's what they do is they provide labor, right? Whereas entities like Habitat for Humanity or Salvation Army, really what they do well is go secure grants and channel funding in those markets. And then there are like here we had HCF, the Hawaii Community Foundation, which is a nonprofit that raised an insane amount of money, like almost more than they could figure out what to do with, and creating solutions that they can disperse capital down through that have efficiency with them, right? Like it's easy to go throw dollars at a situation and have those dollars be inefficient, but how can you create the greatest amount of impact with the least amount of dollars and figuring those channels out? And that's where I love what Red Lightning did, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to have helped them. Is really what they did is they coordinated the volunteer labor angle. We had supplies and equipment that were generously donated by the RAA board members. And we were able to put those two buckets of resources together and then author protocols and a way of going and inspecting properties, qualifying them, assessing the need. Like, if somebody was getting kicked out of their temporary housing in the next 4 weeks, they rose to the top as opposed to somebody that had 2, 4, 6 months in their temporary housing left, and then going and addressing that. The other thing that I think flies under the radar for most restorers is that a majority of these properties that are impacted are, if they're insured, they're likely underinsured.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, underwriting has not caught up with the cost of actually building a structure, and then the multiplier that happens in a catastrophic event too. And so if you're getting this influx of leads and it is a total loss, there's going to be a lot of people that want to come in and arbitrate that claim, whether they're PAs or other types. And if it's a total loss, advising those insureds to say, hey, look, like, you have a limit on your policy. Don't feel like you have to leverage a third party to maximize that benefit, because the likelihood that you're just going to be paid limits and only have a fixed dollar amount to go and rebuild your house is there. As long as you get that, there's no need to engage another party, right? Don't make it harder and pay money to get less money, right? It just doesn't make sense. And I'm not familiar with the legislation in California, but here in Hawaii, one of the bits of legislation that came through in, gosh, I think it was 2021, was that if the carrier provides notice to the insured that they intend to fund limits, then it negates the ability for a PA or another entity to try and capture a percentage of that claim distribution. And I'm just unfamiliar with how that works in California. But knowing that legislation was present here, one of the string of phone calls that I made within the first couple of days was to all the claim supervisors and adjusters that I knew on the carrier side, saying, hey guys, look, like, if it's in the burn zone and it's on, like, it's gone, and you're going to pay limits, send that quick email real fast, just so then that way you're serving the interests of the insured to the best of your ability, right? Because for every one of you, there's probably 20 other PAs that are going to be running around, and not all of them have bad intent. I'm not trying to paint PAs in a bad light, but you know what? Like, the utility of dollars is better served in buying lumber and rebuilding your house than it is in an administrative capacity.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen in the restoration efforts in Lahaina since it happened? Outside of, I know we've talked about insurance and stuff like that, but are there any things that you see from Lahaina that restorers could probably maybe expect that will also happen in California?
There's always a period in time when we have these surges that consumable supplies
Mhm.
are at a limited inventory. And so if you've got a stack of leads sitting on your desk and it's coming and you've got the capital, go get your pre-filters and charcoal filters, go get loaded up on, smoke odor counteract and laundry boosters, like all those proprietary things that are specific to our industry. I'm not too concerned about general consumables like rags and buckets and all that. Like, we won't run out of rags and buckets, but making sure that you have those specialty things, HEPA-vac filters, HEPA-vac bags, the frickin' bristle brush attachments for you. Like, holy crap, you want to talk about reducing the efficiency of your labor force, not having that bristle brush attachment to get window crevices and the attic spaces and all those things. Load up. You'll go through them. And if you have a surplus, be kind to other restorers in your marketplace. And when you see them struggling, go, hey, look, I loaded up. I'd be willing to pass these over to you at a 10 or 20% markup, make a little bit of money myself, but make sure that you're in the best possible place to take care of our community, because we're in this together.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Is there any, just kind of summing up the conversation, anything else that you'd want to say to restorers looking to that are going to be there or in California, or again, anyone sitting on the sidelines that wants to get involved that you haven't already touched on?
I mean, I think like almost an automatic undercurrent of the industry, but it doesn't get talked about enough, in my personal opinion. Take care of the needs of the community first, and the work will come.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, so prior to the 2023 wildfire in Lahaina, we had another one that was pretty gnarly in 2018. And one of the things that we did is we recognized, like, the neighborhood that was impacted was, I'm gonna generalize, but mostly first and second generation immigrants. Some of them, like most had a language barrier, and most were cut from the cloth of, like, I don't call anybody for help, right? Like, we just roll up our sleeves and do it. And so we looked at that section of the neighborhood and said, this is like, our opportunity is not to get leads and actually go do work here. Our opportunity is to try like hell to equip these individuals with the right knowledge, information, and supplies, so then that way they could execute the work themselves in the most efficient manner. And so what we did was we took smoke odor counteractant and laundry booster, packaged it down into pint-sized jars. My safety officer at the time is like, make sure you have the HazCom. It's got to have all the right labeling. So we made all the right labeling, and it was just in mason jars. And then what ends up happening in these events is, like, neighborhood distribution centers, like somebody's like, hey, put all that crap in my garage. And so if anybody needs it, it's here in the neighborhood. We went and supplied all the neighborhood distribution centers. And one of the things was a QR code on the label that I created a YouTube video of, like, okay, if you need to know how to clean combustion particulate out of your house and you've only got 5 minutes to learn, let me give you a crash course. And then the unintended benefit of going into the community in that way was folks that had a higher net worth that got impacted saw what we were doing in the community, and there were people who were consciously on our wait list that could have been served by other restorers much faster, but said, you know what, like, this is the company I want in my home because of what they're doing in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that as a case study to inform all restorers, right? Like, there's always this drive, there's this capitalist nature about us where we want to go and get the work. We just want, and like, that's good, right? Like, we want to get the work so we can take care of our teams and everybody in our team can grow, and, they have more opportunity. I'm not saying that that's bad, but putting the needs of the community first and believing that you will be rewarded for those efforts is always the best strategy, in my opinion.
That's really good advice. And I remember you doing that and how successful that was. So, all right. Well, Anthony, thank you very much for all of your input. For everybody who's listening, there are resources at restorationindustry.org. They have, the RA has a lot of resources for restorers in general. If you're not a member, you should sign up and be a member. The IICRC has the new S700 that is out. You can go to iicrc.org and check that out. That's the fire standard. And at CNR, we're working on compiling as many resources as we can as well. So if you just go to our website, there's a wildfires update article, I guess, where Lauren is working on continuing to compile these interviews and different resources from throughout the industry. So Anthony, thank you very much for your insight and your expertise. Lauren, thanks for being here with me and helping co-host. And I appreciate the conversation. Thank you, guys.
For more Restoration Today and the latest news, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, and find the latest episodes of the Restoration Today podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.